Hey everybody, it's time for another episode of Burgertime, and this time sponsored by Mountain Dew and not sponsored by Windows 10. Windows 10, the source of all my pain and suffering as to why I had to start this show a second time today, only because yesterday, it was last Wednesday, my PC said, hey, got a system update for you. And I said, sure. It says, please, I'll have to reboot. No problem. Just close all my apps, hit install, and then I saw, to my horror, now welcome to Windows 10. The gnashing of teeth happened relatively quickly as I was going, well, there goes my entire productivity forever, considering that, the horror stories. Well, I will have to say the installation of Windows 10 did go a little bit painlessly, somewhat. It did take me a little time to get used to all the stuff. Now, I have other boxes here. I have a Mac Mini that I have running Windows 10 on it, so I'm not totally unfamiliar with the user interface and how Windows 10 works. But, of course, when your main development system, which has all of your software and your entire frickin' livelihood all wrapped up in one box, decides to change operating systems on you, thank you, Microsoft. And as some of our viewers have noticed, is that when I tried starting the stream today, somehow it screwed up one of my settings and turned off the use of my headset so that everybody heard silence. So to all those who are watching the live stream, thank you for your patience. Those of you watching this on YouTube, you're probably wondering, what crack is this girl smoking? So, back to Mountain Dew. And on with the show. And today's topic is Out of This World. Out of This World is a game that I wrote on the Apple IIgs and the Super Nintendo. I did this game in 1992 or 93. I can't remember exactly the year of it. But the game was originally written by Eric Chahi of Delphine Software. Eric Chahi, very talented individual, and he went ahead and coded this game almost completely by himself. And in this game, he is not only a very talented programmer, but Eric is a very talented artist as well. And he, with the Amiga, wanted to try out something brand new that had, at the time, never really been done before. And that was to generate a side from room to room adventure game. But instead of using just standard pixel graphics, he wanted to do it with polygons and stretch the blitter, the Amiga's hardware chipset, to its limits in order for him to make a game that just really is out of this world. If you could look carefully at the screenshots, now I'm not going to get close to the camera because it might actually get out of focus. If you look carefully, you'll see how each of the screenshots are all done with polygon graphics. This game has almost no bitmap graphics at all. He went ahead and wrote the game engine in hand-coded 68,000 assembly on the Amiga. He had hardware direct to the blitter hardware functions so that when he wanted to draw something, he just set a few registers, hit the blitter. Set a few registers, hit the blitter, and it was optimized to nobody's business. He then made the actual game itself. He wrote an editor in Amiga Basic. And this editor was what he used to write the source code and generate the compiled code that effectively made the runtime of this game. And the compiled code, in addition to doing instructions like draw text, move character, change variables, things like that you'd expect with just a programming language, it also had instructions like draw polygon. Draw polygon, here's a list of vertices, draw with the scale, draw with this color. One of the things about this game is while it does do scaling horizontally and vertically, it doesn't do rotation. The Amiga, while it does have blitter, which does hardware drawing, it was kind of limited in what it could do. I mean, for 2D graphics, the Amiga's blitter was just hands down just incredible, especially for 1989, 1990 when the Amiga came out. Well, I've mentioned all this is because when Out of This World first came out, it was just a breakthrough product. It was just graphics that were never seen before, high speed. It was running at 30 frames per second, full screen on an Amiga, which when you see the kind of graphics here, you go like, holy crap, this thing's just amazingly fast. Well, at the time, the only other comparable computer, speed-wise, was the Atari ST. Now, granted, they had to do code in software rendering for the Atari ST, but they were able to do the port to the Atari ST. The engine, they left it alone. They just changed all the blitting code to code that would run on the Atari ST, and Out of This World came out for the Atari ST. Well, now enter Interplay. Delphine Software is a company based in France, and they, of course, were distributing the game known as Another World. That was its original name, Another World. It was being sold in France, England, all the European nations and so forth, but they really weren't selling it very well in the United States. Plus, in the United States, there was a television series, a soap opera called Another World, which, granted, they're not even close. I mean, Another World's just a TV series, slice of life soap opera, where this is a complete sci-fi fantasy game. So they decided, let's give it a brand new name. And Interplay picked up the rights to do this game, and which we got to do the PC version and any other versions we could sell, and of course sell the Amiga and ST versions. But we renamed the game Out of This World, which is hilarious because as soon as we released the game Out of This World, a sitcom showed up on TV called Out of This World. We can't win. And that one was about a little girl who was like an alien, I think it was, and so forth. So, you know, we first had the name Another World, which turned out to be a TV show, and we changed its name to Out of This World, was turned into another TV show, which has absolutely nothing to do with this game. Well, in time, what had happened was that I saw this game, and I said, ooh, that looks really neat, that's really nice, and so forth, and you know, there was meetings at Interplay saying, yeah, we'd like to put it on the PC. That's slam dunk. So we started porting it to the PC. And then we thought, hey, we could easily get this on the Macintosh. So we started porting it to the Mac. But then I looked at the game code and looked at the game, and it says, you know what? I could probably get this working on my Apple IIgs. And Brian Fargo, Interplay is just like, your 2GS? Even your accelerated 2GS couldn't possibly run this game as fast as this. And I was just looking at that, just thinking about how the 2GS scan lines worked and how the video buffers worked. Because like one thing the 2GS had as an advantage for graphics rendering that the Amiga didn't was that the Amiga used bit planes. In order to draw 1 pixel on the Amiga screen, you actually had to write up 4 completely different bytes in 4 different places, because you had one black and white image, then another black and white image, and another black and white image. But when you put the 4 images together, or 5 if you're doing the 32-bit color mode, then it takes all 5 images together, creates the 5 bits across, which gives you a number between 0 and 31. That's your color. But to draw, you have to draw on all different planes. Now, granted, the blitter did a lot of the stuff for you. It's still a lot of work for the hardware to write into up to 5 different locations at the same time. Now, granted, there are some accelerations and some other things like you could do to speed things up, and the Amiga blitter handled this. But Out of This World, the entire graphics engine was about drawing a triangle, which is a span of pixels, which is the blitter had to align it to, I think it was 16 bits per blit for entry and so forth. So it actually generated a lot of extra work for the blitter, whereas the Apple IIgs was 4 bits per pixel, meaning that I just write 1 byte, I get 2 pixels. So while I'm limited in color, 16 colors, by 1 byte per pixel, I could, in theory, write as fast, if not slightly faster, than an Amiga could blit, if with very tight loops. Granted, you know, I have 1 megahertz bus and so forth, so it really, in a contest, the Amiga would kick the 2GS's ass. I mean, let's to be real here. In a fight, in graphics, the Amiga just says, no contest, bang, and the GS falls over dead. But in this particular case, the GS was actually capable of running at comparable speeds. Not 60 frames a second, no way in hell, but enough so at least you could play the game. At the time, there was another console out there called the Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo had a 65816 processor, the exact same one as the Apple II GS. The idea was, we wanted to do Super Nintendo games, and Out of This World really was a game we'd like to do on the Super Nintendo, but immediately the thought was, well, the Amiga is a super powerful computer. The Super Nintendo, while it was powerful, was not an Amiga, so there was no way in the world we could actually do Out of This World on the Super Nintendo. It just couldn't be done. Well, anybody who's been following my career would know that it couldn't be done generally is referred to as challenge accepted. And the challenge was accepted. I took the source code to Out of This World, and I ran off to my little office and looked at the code and realized, there's really not much here. The Out of This World for the for the Amiga really was only about 6,000 lines of assembly code. It was very, very compact. The majority of the game was written in this scripting language that Eric Chahi created. So all I really needed to do, which is what I did for Dragon Wars, was create an interpreter which would run the scripting language and then optimize the hell out of the interpreter in order for it to run the game. It took me about, I think it was like 2-3 weeks, and I sat there doing nothing but translating line by line. At first, I look at the function 68K, I would figure out what it really is supposed to do, and write the equivalent 6516. And I did this for every single function until eventually I had every single function in the game, and then I told it, run. And sure enough, I was running Out of This World on the 2GS. Now, I will tell you that it was running only about 10 frames per second, more like 5-10 frames per second on a very accelerated Apple II GS, only because I hadn't done any real optimizations. My whole thing was just trying to get the game to run, to see, can this game run on a 65816 based computer? And once I had it up and running, the answer was a big resounding, yes, I can. So, I then told Brad, hey, want to see something really scary? And he goes like, okay, comes into my office, and I showed him this, and his jaw just dropped to the floor. Like, I said, yep, this is Out of This World. It's running on my GS. Do you still want a Super Nintendo version of this? He says, yeah, I could make some optimizations, do a few things here. I can get it easily up to 30 frames per second. Just say the word. And at that point, he's like, that's it. You're doing this game. Start. So at that point, I then went ahead and started optimizing all the game engine, hand tuning, figuring out all little tricks I could think of for the 65816 in order for me to get the game running as fast as possible. And once I did, I got the 2GS version on my accelerated GS running about 20 frames per second. Now, to put in perspective, I had this reputation in the industry where I had this hand-wired app. First, it was a transwarp GS, and then later on a zip chip GS, which I was running at about 10 to 14 megahertz, which at the time was like, holy crap, Becky, did you attach rockets to your Apple II? But let's see, still have my sorry here. Okay, I was just reading some people's posts here, but they're talking about the Amiga and stuff like that. It's like really good. Well, after they saw that I was running this game at about 20 to up to 30 frames per second, just using an optimized 2GS engine, that's when I went in, put together a dev kit for the Super Nintendo, which was nicknamed Sluggo3. That's another story. But this dev kit allowed me, it's just a ROM emulator, nothing more. I uploaded the code into the ROM emulator. I then had a cable going into a Super Nintendo. I turned on the Super Nintendo, ran. And I mostly used this handmade dev kit, mostly because Interplay was just too cheap to buy me a official Super Nintendo dev kit. In fact, when we were developing stuff on the Super Nintendo initially, um, we were actually kind of victims of xenophobia from Japan. When we got permission to start doing Super Nintendo software, Nintendo gave us their manuals. The manuals were all in Japanese. And they told us that it was going to take anywhere from 2 to 6 months before they got the translations. Well, Nihongo o haneshimasu ka? Do you speak Japanese? I do now. I went ahead and got a crash course in Japanese, and I spent some time learning the language, and I learned enough of it. And of course, with a little bit of help with my Japanese teacher, I translated the documents enough so I could at least learn all the little ins and outs of the Super Nintendo. So once I got the ins and outs of the Super Nintendo and how to work with this, and since I already worked on doing audio drivers for RPM racing, rock and roll racing, and so forth for the Super Nintendo, because Out of This World was not my first Super Nintendo product. It was actually more like my fourth, because I was doing like audio drivers and assistance on some of the what we now know as Blizzard's Super Nintendo games. I helped a lot on those projects. It was Lost Vikings, RPM Racing, Rock and Roll Racing. Blackthorn, I don't think I've had a hand on that one, but I know Lost Vikings and RPM Racing. I went ahead and figured out all these different tricks and said, hey, I could get this game running at 60 frames per second. I put a Super FX chip in there. I got like a copy of Star Fox. I pulled a chip out, figured out how the chip worked, started using it. I had Alice World running at 60 frames per second. I said, hey, Brian, we're ready. The game's getting ready to ship. Here's the cartridge I'm going to need. And he looks at the price list and says, can you get rid of the Super FX chip? It's too expensive. And I'm like, crap. All right. I went in there and took all the Super FX code and then changed it over to just software rendering. But there were certain parts of the software rendering which was running really, really slow. One of them is like I had to take a full screen background and copy it to another one. And I found this trick that if I had static memory on the cartridge, I could actually copy that static memory at super speeds using DMA. And it says, like, great, give me a cartridge that uses a static memory, and I could get you 30 frames per second. And he goes like, oh, that's too expensive. Can you do it without that? Like, okay, fine. So no battery backed up RAM, so if we're going to have to save the game to little entry codes, that was popular back then, was like when you get to a certain level, it says, here's your code. Why? There's no battery backed up RAM, there's no save games. So you write it down on a piece of paper, and that's how you save your games. So, okay, no Super FX chip, no battery backed up RAM. All right, I did make it so that I could get the software rendering again to run at about 30 frames per second if, of course, I'm using a fast cartridge. Because cartridges at the time, you could buy them either at 2.5 megahertz or 3.6 megahertz. Now, to give you an idea, the Super Nintendo actually runs at 3.6 megahertz. It's a pretty fast chip for the time. But the ROMs that run at that speed cost a little bit more than ROMs that run at a slower speed. So, using a 3.6 megahertz ROM, my dev kit can run at 10 megahertz, so it was no problem for me just to set the switch to run the dev kit. I got it running at really fast frame rates. It's looking good, ready to ship. And then Fargo comes in and says, like, can you use the slower ROM? It'll save us 50 cents a cartridge. And I'm like, oh, come on, you cheap. Oh, ah! So I went ahead and used the slow ROM and found out that the game would run at best 20 frames per second. I tried little stunts like letterboxing the game, so making it look like a movie, but I'm actually rendering less, which up the frame rate, but it wasn't quite getting it. I'm like, how the hell am I going to get this thing to run as fast as I want? And then it dawned on me. The DMA registers that are on Super Nintendo, because I'm not using a static memory anymore, I'm not using DMA. But so the DMA registers are sitting there going blah, 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 blah. However, after reading the technical specs very carefully, in Nihongo, Japanese that is. Come to find out that those memory registers actually run at the full CPU speed, 3.6 megahertz. Now, being the evil bitch that I am, hardware registers are essentially values you could just write into and read into as if it was memory. There was about 32 bytes of memory that are used as registers, but as long as you don't actually use them, the hardware, you just put values in and read them back. Put them in, read them back. What if I put a 32-byte function that would draw a scan line of polygon data in there? Hack. Copy the function in there. Call the function. I had a 10% speed improvement using a slow ROM. I got my frames per second. Of course, emulator authors later on would hate my guts, wondering like, why is it that this cartridge doesn't run on my emulator, but it runs on every other one and there's no hardware on it? It's because this bitch used hardware registers that are only supposed to be used for setting up the DMA values as a place to put a piece of code so that it would actually run blitters as fast as possible. It's how I was able to get the frame rate I wanted. And with that, added a Star Wars-like intro screen and text and stuff. Shipped Out of This World for the Super Nintendo. And that was my little nightmare for getting that game. That's one reason why Super Nintendo Out of This World was one of my favorite hacks, because it was the thing all about on, I could have just chinsed out and used a Super Effects chip, and in that case I probably would have been able to have 30 frames to 60 frames per second without even trying. But of course, then without that, I had a static memory solution. I couldn't do that. I had to do fast ROM, couldn't do that. I shipped that game on a 512K byte cartridge using slow memory so it would save Interplay as much money as possible. So when we shipped that cartridge, it maximized our profit potential, which of course helped Interplay a great deal. I mean, it sold quite a few copies, and I remember I had lots of magazine articles and everything about it going like, the thing that made me very, very proud was when people and reviewers were playing the game and just saying, I can't believe a Nintendo is doing that. And then when I tell them there's no Super Effects chip in there, then they really just melt their brains going like, how the hell did you get this game running without a Super Effects chip? Shoving memory code into DMA registers was how. Well, it didn't end there. See, Out of This World, I am notable for 3 versions of it. That was my first. Well, of course, after getting the Out of This World done for the Super Nintendo, it meant now I had a very, very optimized version of the game engine. And since I had already had a shell that ran for the Apple IIgs, it really only took me a few weeks worth of work, and I went ahead and wrote the official Apple IIgs version of Out of This World. Well, the story behind this is now 1991, 1992. The problem was that in 1991, the market for Apple IIgs software was pretty much dead. All of the major publishers, EA, Activision, Interplay, whatever, was just not selling 2GS software anymore. All projects were canceled. Dragon Wars was the last 2GS game that was released by Interplay. I think it was also, we did a 2GS Battle Chess, 2GS Neuromancer, and in Dragon Wars, but then at that point we just weren't interested. Now granted, I had a finished game. Out of This World was done for the 2GS, but there was no interest in it at all. And as far as Interplay was concerned, it's like, yeah, Becky, that's nice, but we need you to work on paying projects. Well, unbeknownst to, I knew about this company called the Big Red Computer Club. They were already starting to do a little bit of business where they were buying up the rights to popular games, porting them to the 2GS, or in some cases finding the abandoned projects and having someone finish them, or in some cases the games were finished, they just weren't going to be released, and they bought the rights and then distributed them. So I then went ahead and approached them saying, hey, would you like to sell Out of This World? And they go like, holy crap, yes we would. So then I went ahead and made an introduction between them and Interplay. And Brian Fargo was like, ugh, these guys can't be serious. Well, if they're, money's green and we like money, so how about this? They're not going to sell the rights to Out of This World. In fact, I don't believe Interplay even had the right to sublet the rights, because we did license this from Delphine. This is not an Interplay product. This is a Delphine product. It just that Interplay had the rights to distribute in the US and other countries. So Interplay did have the right to essentially do a 2GS version and release it and send royalties to Delphine. But we didn't have the right to say, oh, Big Red Computer Club, you have the rights to sell it and give us a royalty. It just didn't work that way. But however, Interplay used this interesting packaging. To save money, Interplay had generic boxes, which every game used this box. And inside the package, if I can actually open this, we had our warranty card, our instruction manual, but then we always printed a specific card which had just references specific to the platform. This is a really nice way of being able to cut costs on physical goods. So all we really needed to do was to include a reference card printed specifically for the 2GS and the floppy disk that contained the game. And then the sleeve, because you see this inner box was used for every Interplay game, no matter what it was. All we did was just swap out the sleeve. So we took some sleeves that were already done for PC, Amiga versions, and so forth, and we just printed a sticker. So we told the Big Red Computer Club, we will print you 1,000 copies of Out of This World, and we will charge you $25 a copy. No refunds. Deal? And Big Red Computer Club really had to think about this, going like, can we sell 1,000 copies? And they took a risk, and they said, sure. So they wrote a check for $25,000 to Interplay, which Brian was going like, these guys are serious. So, promptly, we had 1,000 stickers printed. We had 1,000 warranty cards the reference cards printed. And we then just told a disk duplicator, hey, just take this floppy disk and make 1,000 copies of it using your Mac, and you're done. And at that point, we then put it in a couple cases and mailed them off to Big Red Computer Club. And I still remember where Fargo was going like, suckers. They'll be lucky if they sell 10 copies. Well, let's put it this way. The Apple IIgs users had the last laugh, because within 3 months, Interplay got a phone call. We want to order another 1,000 copies. They sold out. And it's like, Brian was going like, hey, he once came to my office one day and just said, hey, Burger, I just got another check for $25,000. I had no idea that game was going to sell so well. There we go. So all we had to do, in fact, luckily when we printed stickers and stuff, they actually print like 4,000 or 5,000 of them. So it was really trivial for them to do another run and send it off to the Big Red Computer Club. So there are about, so Out of This World for the 2GS, there's about 2,000 copies running around somewhere in the world. Of course, I have mine. Someone asks here, I wonder if Becky, Epix911 asks, I wonder if Becky had been given free reign to port Wing Commander VGA to a non-accelerated 2GS, could she have pulled it off? And the answer is yes. Wing Commander I could have ported to the 2GS. I don't see any, I saw the game and I played it, so forth. The way the game was written in such a way, I mean, I would have pulled some little cute tricks for optimization so that I wouldn't have done the stretching and so forth. I would have just done sprites, but it would have been Wing Commander. So yeah, I would have been able to do it. But however, though, history has dictated that that particular project was never started. So anyways, so this game here is technically, it's the last commercial Apple IIgs product ever made by a major publisher. Now, there were some games, like there was a Zork Shanghai trilogy or something like that was released by Big Red for the Apple IIgs, and there was also Ultima 1, which is a port I did. That was first released by Vitesse, and then it also was being sold by Shareware Solutions for a while. But those are like, little one-offs and stuff like that. But that's when the Apple IIgs is actually turned in the hobbyist market. And there's, of course, a freeware game I worked on called Wolfenstein 3D for the 2GS. Well, after this game was put to bed, I then got a phone call, and then, of course, a personal visit from Eric Chahi. Eric Chahi came over to my office, and he was like, "I couldn't believe you did this for this." Of course, he was speaking in French, and I was replying to him in Francais. But we had a wonderful conversation. He was just amazed at what I had done on the 2GS as well as the Super Nintendo. And because of that, he went ahead. Let me see if I can zoom in on that for you. Let's see here. Where is the camera thing? Camera controls. There we go. And let's see if I could zoom in. Let's see, is there a button here to zoom in or out? See, I'm trying to make it zoom in, but it's not. Oh, there we go. Well, I will blame Windows for this one because the life cam is not zooming in. Well, in the center, I'm going to zoom it back to where my original image is. I have a painting, or actually it's a print of the cover of Out of This World. And Eric Chahi was the one who painted it. And he gave me a print and he signed it. And it says in French, "Congratulations for the completion and the shipping of the Super Nintendo version of Out of This World, signed Eric Chahi." And when he gave me that painting, or the print, it was already framed and everything. And I'm like, oh my God, thank you very much. And it's been hanging on my wall ever since, because it always is a reminder of how I was appreciated for the work that I had done in Out of This World. Well, a few years later, Trip Hawkins had this really interesting idea. And that idea was called 3DO. Which is one of those where history is not so kind to it, but however, it was a nifty little box. The thing was that we were trying to do games for the 3DO, and I was one of the people who learned new platforms relatively quickly, so I picked up the 3DO, and I was responsible for 8 games on that platform. Most famously known for Wolfenstein 3D, and then the infamous Doom port, which is a topic of another show. Please check my YouTube channel for that sordid story. But Out of This World was brought up. During the course of my development of Out of This World for the 2GS, some of the things I wanted to do to make optimizations was I actually reverse engineered the bytecode that Eric Chahi used and created an assembler that would allow me to edit the bytecodes, so I could modify things to tell, if you want to draw this triangle, instead substitute this call, which is much faster on a 2GS. And it also helped me on some things on the Super Nintendo. Well, as we were discussing different products we could do for, that's pretty, it's very, Summer Beast 76 says pretty much what was written on the print. What I was saying is that for the 3DO version was that we came with the idea, why don't we put Out of This World on the 3DO? And of course, because the 3DO was one of those premier platforms, you really didn't want to just do a straight port. If I just took the graphics and just ported it over and really didn't look any different, then people would say, well, why would I want to buy the 3DO version when I could just play the PC, Mac, or whatever version? And then that's when I suggested, why don't we redraw the backgrounds? I can capture all the screens. I'll write a special version of Out of This World that all it does is goes to every single room. I will draw the background, capture that, and save it as a TGA file. And then we take all those TGA files and send it off to someone to draw them. Brian loved the idea. So Brian and other people at Interplay found this animation studio that does background art for cartoons. And they then, I will show you, I'm going to switch screens here. Here is Out of This World for the, it's interesting, settings. That's pretty weird. Let's see, subregion, select region. Nope. Pretty strange. Okay, I think that fixed it. There we go. Okay, here is Out of This World's art for the 3DO. What I did is I took the original art that was done for the Super Nintendo or 2GS, rendered it at 320 by 200, and then printed these out. Once I printed them out, we sent them all off to the animation studio, and then they started drawing this. This is what the game now looks like. These are the backgrounds. This is the infamous scene that starts off at the beginning of the game, where Lester pops out of the water, and then the monster comes in. We had these drawn essentially over the original art as if they were like storyboards. Now, what really came in handy with these people who did the cartoons was that they're used to taking storyboards, drawing them to spec, because the cell animators had to draw exactly their characters on these screens. So because of the way the masking worked, is that these had to follow very specific locations, because as the character walks, it's still using the masking from the original vector-based version of Out of This World, but I'm just simply replacing the vector-drawn backgrounds with this painting. When I put the polygon characters on top of this art, it really blew everybody's mind. Here's the underwater scene. Here's the scene where you're in the what's it called? You're in the jail with the buddy, so forth. But I'm just going to go through. But as you can see, here's some images that are fantastical. But this allowed me to make a version of the 3DO. It allowed me to make a version of Out of This World for the 3DO that wasn't just a straight port. This game looked fantastic. All the sound effects were redone. The music was also recomposed and playing on, what's it called? Yeah, we actually had a small no, I don't think they actually used orchestra for that one. I think they used, let me get back to feed. They used a small band, and they redid all the music, redid all the background graphics and so forth, but the foreground is still drawing in the polygon system that we had for the 3DO. And with that, it made the game it just looked beautiful, even though it was still the same game. Much like when I'm running something that looks like this. And let me see here. Let me go grab this. Whoops. Sometimes these things get a little old, but I'm going to go change back to the Acer desktop. There we go. See, like, everything old is new again. Whereas here, it's the same game as before, except backgrounds have been changed and updated where things have higher resolutions. And, of course, they can be changed into different sizes. I think, no, this is not resizable yet. I'm going to make it resizable. But now this, if you want this, you need to go over to In Exile and Pledge. So get on my face. Close that up. But now I'm going to open it up to questions because I've just happened to notice that I'm now only down to 12 minutes left before. Actually, I'm going to extend it a little bit only because I had the aborted beginning. But let's see. Our friends on the Twitch TV channel, which by the way is Twitch TV/BurgerBecky, and of course my YouTube channel is youtube.com/BurgerBecky. You can also follow me at BurgerBecky, or you can also go see my personal website at burgerbecky.com. I see a trend here. Funny that. The questions here is Windows 10 biting Becky again. It's been biting me ever since it installed itself out of Magic. I see Sailor Fuku's instant Sailor Ronco urge. Yes, that's Sailor Ganymede on that earlier image that I had. In fact, let me just show it to you. Yep, that's Sailor Ganymede. Let's see. My wife's a Sailor Moon fan. This is from Chris P872. My wife is a Sailor Moon fan, so I've seen a bunch of watching with her. I enjoyed Simone and is really enjoying Hunter x Hunter that Naoko's husband did. I hope Hunter x Hunter is going again. Want more Sailor Moon Crystal? Okay. Lady Sephiroth, I want some less Sailor Moon Crystal myself too. I wish there was more, but not my call. Becky, can we have a link to your YouTube channel to catch the previous episodes? Well, I'm going to go ahead. I've already said the channel, but I'm going to put it. I'm typing it, so of course the home audience who is watching this on YouTube will have no idea what the heck I was typing. But it's of course YouTube/BurgerBecky. Let's see. I don't know. Twitch might be twitching, random buffering. It's only 2K stream Twitch. I can handle it, baby. Okay. Epix911 writes, Becky, is there a market you think for your new company to do ports of older RPGs for today's market? I just think there's a potential beyond your Bard's Tale 1, 2, and 3 ports. I know there are licensing issues, etc., but I take you would like to be Good Old Games does only better. Well, let's see here. I am right now in negotiations with 2 different companies for 2 different RPGs that I actually worked on, and to bring them back in an updated version. But then again, do not forget that I am also focusing a lot of my effort on Dragons of the Rip, which is a brand new game done in the similar style. And hopefully when we start the Kickstarter, you'll be able to, say, shut up and take my money. Sector 88. Becky, many years ago when I was a young boy, I bought a second-hand copy of How to Master the Video Games. I was thrilled to find out that your KansasNet keynote that you had involvement in getting the book written. Yes, look in the special thanks in the back of the book, and my name's in there, or at least my old name. I also had a hand in How to Master the Home Video Games. Both books were written by Tom Hirschfeld, basically a ghostwriter that was hired by... I forgot the publishing company, but they wanted me to write the books. But at the time, I was like still a kid, and I really wasn't very good at writing at the time. So they had the ghostwriter write them, but I pretty much wrote those books. He just was the one who took all my notes and all the times I talked with him on the phone to put my thoughts and feelings and things into words to put them in those books. But just as Sector 88 had asked for, look for How to Master the Video Games and How to Master the Home Video Games by Tom Hirschfeld. The books are published in 1981, 1982, and they were novel-like paperbacks that I was the one who actually wrote the books. Tom Hirschfeld was the ghostwriter, or more like, he was the writer, I was the source. Mandabar asks, I don't suppose you worked on Homeworld, Cataclysm by any chance. No one knows where the source code went for it. I have no idea. I had absolutely no involvement on Homeworld. I love seeing the game, and I did get a copy of the reboot, the remake that they did recently. But I will have to say that Homeworld's actually one of the games I had nothing to do. So, while I am on my part-time hobby, shall we say, is a source code collector. And I am working with companies to try to get code released, such as like recently I had a hand for releasing Space Ace for the Apple II GS, and now I just secured permission to release the old Apple II Classic Taxman on GitHub, which I hope to be able to get to that sometime Wednesday or Thursday. There are many others, but then again, there was one I just got shot down. I asked EA if I can release the source code to SimCity for the Apple II GS, and they basically gave me a big fat red blinking light no. So I'll have to try again later. Sector 88. Oh, let me see. Venus 3DO versus 3DO Planet. What's the permission from author for releasing the source for 3DO? Well, if I wrote the code, I can just release whatever the heck I want. If someone else wrote the code, I have to ask permission. And if there's a copyright involved, such as like Doom or Space Ace or something, I have to get specific permissions to make sure that what is happening is not competing with modern thing. That's how I was able to get Doom and Space Ace, is the sense that, yeah, it's got art from Doom, but if someone was to use that particular version of the art, you're going to have a very poor version of Doom. Now, granted, the source code itself is really an old engine, it's old technology. If you use that as the basis of a game, it's going to be really retro. And the art itself, it's still copyright the original owners, such as like Doom 3DO. You may have access to the code and may access to the art. If you use the code to write your own game, fine, have fun. If you use any of the art, you're going to get sued, because the art and the game and the concept of Doom is property of ZeniMax. The game, the concept of Space Ace, is property of Don Bluth. So while you could use the source code to Space Ace for the 2GS to write your own animated video game, Twitch game, you better make your own art, you better make your own sound, because the art and sound audiovisual is property of somebody. The code, however, if you want to use it as the basis of your own work-alike game, but you put the effort into making your own assets, more power to you. Epix911 asked, duplicate question from above. Dragons of the Rip. Will gameplay allow parties to stumble upon tougher areas and let you reap rewards if you survive? I just hate games that scale you and progress through the story in too linear fashion. And the answer is yes. The monsters and the levels are set difficulty. Therefore, if you come in with a character, let's say import characters from a previous game or cheat by sector editing and create godlike beings, well then yes, every combat will be an utter joke. You'll just go in there and just look at them and they'll die for 75,000 points of damage. Now, granted, if that's how you want to play Dragons of the Rip, well, fine. I kind of think you're really hurting yourself in the experience. But then again, if all you're caring about is solving the puzzles and questing, well then, and you don't care about combat, then fine. Create godlike characters as far as I'm concerned. My whole point is to create a world and have you play in it. But if you want to invoke godlike power, do so. Have fun. Any other questions here? Let's see. Dragon Wars might be one of those. Okay, let me ask what's that. Someone was asking about other games that may be remastered and so forth. Dragon Wars may be one of those. Let's see here. Man, that's... Yeah, that's... Yeah, I need to fix that. Well, I got art. I'm not really prepared to make announcements yet, but there are games that are being developed right now. I'm not really working on one title at a time. I tend to work on several. So in time, I will be making announcements and stuff like that. But for the time being, the game that I am able to show you and able to talk about at this moment is, of course, the Bard's Tale Trilogy, which I will remind you, if you want to get your grubby little hands on the Bard's Tale Trilogy when they are ready, please go to the In Exile website, go to the Bard's Tale 4 Kickstarter. If you haven't already pledged, please go to PayPal and send it in, and make sure you put a little note so to let them know that you came because of me and that you're there because you want to pledge so you can get your hands on the Bard's Tale trilogy. It is free to everybody who pledges. I think it was $20 to $25 or more. There is go to the In Exile website for full details. But then once we get this game done, everybody who's on the pledge list will be getting the appropriate keys to get it downloaded on Steam, Good Old Games, and whatever methods we're going to be using. Now, granted, I'm not really sure about, at this time, how we're going to be distributing it, but we are going to be distributing it. Let's see, next. Versus 3DO Planet means to ask, how did you get permission from Eric Chahi to do a 3DO version if you did get permission? Okay. When we signed the rights to distribute Out of This World, one of the things that we signed when Interplay purchased it from Delphine Software was the ability to port it on other platforms, and there was already a clause in the contract stating, if we did a version of a game on another platform, we will pay you this percentage of royalties. So all it was is that we had carte blanche to port it to every platform, which included the 2GS. Which of course was what allowed the 2GS to even exist, was the fact that we had such a clause in the contract. But it also meant that when we did under the 3DO, we already knew every 3DO version we sold, we were going to write a small check to Delphine Software and get it out there. The only thing that we really had to worry about permission was that we respected the work. We couldn't, let's say, do anything or make really crappy art or do something that would make people say, oh my God, that is a horrible version Out of This World. I'll never play Out of This World again. If we had done that, then Eric Chahi and Delphine Software would have told Interplay, that's it, forget the contract, take away the games, go away. But as you've seen with the 3DO version, we did do a very respectful version of the game, and it honored the franchise. Chris P872 asks, how often do you put Easter eggs in your game? Not often enough, that's my answer. Expect more. There'll probably be something stupid, my head getting chopped off in inappropriate places, and 99 berserkers coming out of places because you chanted the unholy word. Like the Bard's Tale remastering, yeah, I'm keeping the cheats, and I'm keeping the, not really the cheats, the Easter eggs, they're staying. And, yeah, just don't say it to the Temple of the Mad God. Bad things happen to people who say burger there. Let's see. Chris P827 says, I pledged before they added Becky's remasters. Once they announced the remasters, I wasn't sure which I wanted more. Just make sure you let them know in the comments. Because it does affect whether or not I do more products with them and so forth. I am talking with them about possibly doing, after the trilogy is done, about another product with them, but we will see. Next, Epix911 writes, Becky, you mentioned you would, in your port of Bard's Tale 1, 2, 3 for the PC, make enhancements in areas if they made sense. Is one of them going to be resolution? Will they be able to play them in 1920 by 1080p, or is it going to be pixel 320 by 200? That screenshot I just showed you was running at 720p. I could change the resolution anything I want. It'll scale, and the shaders will do the appropriate blending for you. So yeah, you can run at any resolution you want. And my wife here is actually taking the time right now to redo the font so that the text will render very crisply on high-res screens. Oh, Epix911 says, I missed that screenshot. Well, guess what? Let's go ahead and fix that for you. I'm running the game right now. And let me go close this up. There we go. And I'm going to Acer Desktop. There is the Bard's Tale opening shot for the trilogy. Now, I'm not going to show anything more right now because I'm still working on this engine right now. But there it is in its glory, and there's our old school logo because you notice it's a much higher resolution than the rest of the game. But that is running natively on a PC. That is not emulated. That is a real running game. In fact, the whole the exe and all the game data is weighing in at just under a meg. Funny that. Another one says, Sector 88 asks, I recall you saying you had involvement with Wolfenstein 3D. Were you involved in the DOS port too? Well, the DOS port was the original game. I had very little help on that one. I mean, I helped id Software a little bit here and there with some math functions. My claim to fame on Wolf 3D was that I'm the one who did a lot of the work on the Super Nintendo port. I did the Mac OS port. I did the 3DO port and then the 2GS port. So there were 4 versions of Wolfenstein 3D I worked on. They all came from the same source code, which is a heavily modified version from the version from DOS. In fact, it's virtually indistinguishable because I used BSP trees and stuff like. I mean, there's a lot of tech that was in Doom that ended up being folded into Wolfenstein 3D, which allowed me to render it at such speeds on the Super Nintendo and the Apple IIgs. Versus 3DO Planet says, have you any other stuff of Another World on the wall or somewhere? No, the only thing I got on the wall is just that signed print of Another World's painting. But hey, it's signed by Eric Chahi. Come on. How could you get better than that? I mean, not unless you want me to hang Eric Chahi on the wall. Granted, he's not going to be too thrilled about that. And I had to keep feeding and cleaning up after him. So as you can see, it's better to have the picture. Epics. If time, you showed a shrink wrap copy of Bard's Tale 3 last week. What other good RPGs do you have shrink wrap? All of them. Let's see here. Yeah, let's see. Oh, yeah. This is the... I think this will blow their minds. Wasteland! Still in the shrink wrap. This is the Commodore 64 version. Yeah. If things were different, I would be holding a 2GS version. Granted, once we got the word that Bard's Tale 3 for the 2GS was going to get canceled, guess what else got canceled? But, yeah, shrink wrap version of Wasteland. Let's see. See, she's on Facebook instead of working on fonts. Yeah.
What? No, I am.
Versus 3DO Planet says, someone was saying she's on Facebook and still working on fonts. I think they were referring to my wife and the fact that you could see what's on her screen.
Here.
Oh yeah, she's that's. Can you let me move the camera? That's Janelle right now showing the font that she's currently working on for the Bard's Tale Remastered. So there. Bleh. Let's see here. Next is questions. Could recall played. Okay, Chris P872 reminded me of something, which is what is the next topic for next week. Next week, I'm going to be talking about BurgerLib and my method of generating programs. How do I write code? I will be talking about make projects, which is a Python script that I use that generates project files. I will be talking about how BurgerLib works, how I use it in this case, Bard's Tale is written under BurgerLib. So I'll be showing examples of the source code of the Bard's Tale Remastered and how I'm able to use the tools of BurgerLib to be able to build the app, how I put it together, how it compiles, and then how it can both run on the Mac and running on a PC using the same source code. Next question. That'll be a great episode. Can't wait. Your Janelle, interesting topic. You. Okay, well, I am just about running out of time. So is there any last minute questions before I go ahead and make this die? Hurry up. Questions or this will die. Too late. Murdered. All right, well, I'm going to be closing this up now. Next week, on Sunday at 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific time, I'll be talking about BurgerLib. I'll be talking about make projects. If you want to actually look at make projects right now, you can download it on Python using easy install. So those of you who are Python inclined, just type in easy underbar install space make projects or easy underbar install space burger. And you can go ahead and see the stuff that I have been working on in my Python libraries, which is part of my build system. And, oh, Chris P872 says, "Hun, your font looks nice." She says thank you. Anyways, I'll be signing off, and thank you again for another wonderful moment listening to me blather on about stuff at Burger Time.